Homicide is the most horrendous crime imaginable. So how can one man's desire lead to murder?
He had claimed that they had had a sexual relationship, but he had accidentally killed her.
The sex probably was non-consensual. So what a better way of keeping somebody from telling a story on you, whether it's real or not, than to kill them.
In Texas, a small-time crook became a stalker, rapist, and double killer. He got away with it for almost 2 decades.
The way he was from a very young age, there was something in his personality that was disturbed. He's a manipulative, self-centered, control freak. Incredibly dangerous, probably a psychopath.
We meet the cold case cops who came face to face with the killer within.
Pure evil for someone that could take 2 defenseless women and brutally murder them as he did.
He talked like you and I talk over supper. This was just another day at the office for him.
We got time. It's 5:26. This thing doesn't kick off till 6.
The governor already went with his decision too.
What's that?
The governor?
Yes, it's a go. It's going to be a go. The governor hasn't given a stay in 12 years of being the governor.
In 2012, Rodrigo Hernandez, a 38-year-old Texan, was on death row facing execution for raping and killing a 38-year-old single mother.
He attacked her, he raped her, and he killed her by strangling her. He then took her body to another location and just dumped it in a bin. So this is not somebody who has any kind of care for his victims.
Facing death himself, Hernandez was preparing to take a secret to the grave: that he was also responsible for another violent death 21 years earlier.
I don't think a normal person can shoot a defenseless 77-year-old woman in the head 3 times and have sex with her and not think that there's something mentally wrong upstairs. I'm not sure that that person could ever be rehabilitated into society. It's a danger to any human being.
Rodrigo Hernandez was born in Texas in 1973 and brought up in Michigan. At the time of his arrest, everyone thought of him as a normal, loving father who worked as a local laborer.
He didn't look really tough or really scary, or he seemed like a fairly normal guy.
His sister stated that he was a very kind person, never angry, very soft-spoken, had no pattern of violent behavior.
Hernandez had another side. He was a prolific criminal who had racked up a series of convictions at a young age.
This was a man who enjoyed breaking the rules. This was a man who enjoyed just doing it his own way, being answerable to absolutely no one.
It was beyond just a little bit of a troubled teen. His behavior went beyond that.
He's been in and out of the system for a long time. He's made quite the name for himself in the Bexar County area where he grew up. Is not a very good individual. He's not somebody that you'd probably be very happy when your kiddos bring home for Thanksgiving dinner.
In 1990, at just 17, Hernandez was sent to prison, serving a 6-month stint following a burglary. It would be the first of many sentences behind bars.
Oftentimes, predominantly with prolific offenders, we see them starting in early childhood and then escalating in adolescence from minor rule breaking, disobedience with parents and teachers and other responsible authority figures into straight up breaking the law, such as shoplifting, using drugs and alcohol, vandalism. And then by the time they hit adulthood, it's typically full-on serious crime, even escalating into very serious offenses such as sex offenses and violence.
In 1992, he moved to San Antonio, Texas, while on probation for breaking into a store in Michigan. The severity of Hernandez's crimes quickly spiraled. By 1994, he had escalated to rape and murder.
Susan Verstegen was a single mother who lived in Texas, 38 years old, and employed by the Frito-Lay company, stocking shelves at various convenience stores in the area. She was a real proud mother of a 15-year-old boy who was her life.
A mother, a co-worker, that was just living life the day that she crossed paths with Rodrigo.
In the early hours of the 18th of February, Susan had been restocking vending machines at a chain of local convenience stores where Hernandez also worked.
My personal opinion is Rodrigo Hernandez had seen Susan Verstegen on a number of occasions. He had that opportunity while he worked at a grocery store. It would not be unlike Rodrigo to follow Susan to her location of where she stocked shelves. I'm certain that her schedule was pretty much very similar on a day-to-day basis, and encounter her as she came out of that store by herself in the dark and got into her own vehicle.
Hernandez followed her with only one thing on his mind: sex.
Somebody who will stake out a victim, stalk them, know their moves, and then attack them really speaks to the fact that he was trying his best to get what he wanted in the easiest way possible. He may have had more interest in this specific victim, but ultimately, rather than trying to get to know her or to woo her to him, he decided the best way was to, go about it aggressively, forcefully, and to do what he wanted without any concern for her feelings or what was gonna happen to her.
If I was guessing on why Rodriguez killed her, like most, either has some type of issue or was afraid somebody was going to tell, which would lead me to believe that the sex probably was non-consensual. So what a better way of keeping somebody from telling a story on you, whether it's real or not, than to kill them.
Hernandez then dragged Susan into her car, where he attacked, raped, and strangled her.
Hernandez, when he was strangling Susan, he may have been strangling her whilst he was raping her, may have done it afterwards, but there would have been a point when he knew she was dead or unconscious, and he just carried on.
Strangulation is one of the most personal and sometimes intimate ways that someone could kill another person. Other types of crimes and ways of killing somebody, such as poisoning or explosives, you can do from a distance, and you may not even see the person die, which makes it a lot easier to commit. And so with Susan, where he got to know her a little better by stalking her, he actually wanted to commit the murder in a more intimate way by strangling her.
After he killed Susan, Hernandez dumped her body in a garbage dumpster outside a nearby church, where she was found the following afternoon.
Well, this would be very difficult for San Antonio police because you potentially have 3 crime scenes. Obviously, you have the last place that Susan is known to have frequented, and that would be leaving place of employment, the grocery store in which she stocked the shelves. Secondly, the location where her body is found. And third, where her vehicle is found. Because where her vehicle is found is the last place that the suspect was.
Investigators spent days scouring the scene for clues as to who could have committed this horrific crime.
There was no DNA evidence on Susan Verstegen's body. However, her vehicle had DNA evidence on a seat, which is believed to be semen, and also fingerprints were found inside her car.
The police cross-checked the fingerprints and DNA to their records, but didn't find a match. They had no idea who Susan's killer might be. It seemed like Hernandez had got away with murder.
I'm not sure that you could describe him any other way than pure evil for the actions that he has done.
In 1994, the investigation into the rape and murder of Susan Verstegen, a 38-year-old mother from San Antonio, Texas, had gone cold.
After the murder, she was dumped in a large garbage can, a dumpster. She was reported missing, and then she was ultimately found sometime later. The event wasn't witnessed. There was limited evidence at the time. This case went unsolved for approximately 10 years. They were able to obtain some DNA, but again, at this particular time, DNA is in its infancy. We don't have the database back then like we have now.
Thanks to an entirely different crime committed in Michigan, police were about to finally catch their killer. Having evaded justice for Susan's killing, Hernandez spent the rest of the 90s between Michigan and Texas. He continued to work as a laborer and roofer, and in 1996, he became a father. However, the criminal activity didn't stop, and by 1998, 25-year-old Hernandez was in prison for a 3rd time.
In 1998, Rodrigo beat a man almost to death with a bottle, and he was sent to prison for over 3 years.
Because he was such a prolific criminal and such a prolifically violent man, it was only a matter of time before his DNA was going to be on the database, and that's exactly what happened.
When he was released in 2002, as part of his release program, he had to provide a DNA sample. That DNA sample was run through our CODIS database, and a connection made to the 1994 murder of Susan Verstegen in Texas.
The DNA was a match to that found on the seat in Susan's vehicle in 1994. Hernandez was swiftly arrested, and when presented with the evidence, he initially confessed.
From the first time that Rodrigo Hernandez was interviewed by San Antonio detectives back in 2002, he admitted his involvement with her. He had claimed that they had had a sexual relationship, but he had accidentally killed her and made some really poor choices afterwards by disposing of her body.
When asked why he would have committed these brutal murders, Hernandez responded that he was high on marijuana and he had some drinks that night. But there are many people who use marijuana and have alcohol and would never go on to commit such heinous murders. This seems like an excuse for his behavior.
Substance misuse is never the only factor in any offending. There are always other factors that need to be considered, and often it may be used as a means of justifying, minimizing, but it's not.
By the time the case was seen in court, Hernandez had changed his story. he was now claiming he wasn't responsible for the killing.
He had a written, signed confession to the homicide in Texas. But what he said was that the investigator actually wrote out the confession and that he just signed it.
But a Texas jury were not convinced by Hernandez's story. The DNA evidence, however, was indisputable.
Rodrigo Hernandez was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Susan Verstegen in 2004, and he was given the death penalty.
30-year-old Hernandez's true nature had finally been revealed, and it seemed justice had finally been served. But unknown to the cold case team, Hernandez held another dark secret, buried deep in his past.
Rodrigo Hernandez had a real difficult childhood growing up. He was raised in Texas, and at the age of 12, he was sent here with his sister to Grand Rapids, Michigan to live with a grandmother. He come from a broken home where he would have very little contact with his parents. He spoke no English, and he was placed in school. And he struggled in school because he was having a challenge of learning the language and also being educated. And so it was an uphill battle for him, and an alternative schooling was suggested.
It was this school move, when he was around 13, that would prove to be a turning point in Hernandez's life.
That's when things went real wrong for Rodrigo. He started with the wrong crowd and became a gang member here in Grand Rapids with the Latin Kings.
Particularly during adolescence, which is already so difficult because these kids are between childhood and adulthood and they're trying to figure things out. When you add in additional circumstances, such as moving, such as disruption in the family, there's an increased need for support and attention. And if you're not getting it from a friend group that's pro-social, it may be easy to fall into a gang where they want you to break the rules. They want to give you positive affirmations for doing the wrong thing. And it may feel more natural and like they fit in, particularly for kids who feel like they don't fit in anywhere else.
By his description, he wasn't supervised a lot. Although he lived with his grandmother worked a lot to support the kids, and he was without supervision a lot of the time. So he was kind of left to fend for himself, and the gang was kind of how he filled in those kind of relationships.
There is a sense of brotherhood, fraternity, if you like, and within that friendship, a sense of belonging. Within the gang, essentially the reinforcement that we're here for you. We've got your back. You don't need to worry about anything or anyone else.
It was as part of the infamous Michigan gang that Hernandez got his first taste of violent crime.
He's a product of his environment. He's a product of the people that he ran around with. I've said this my whole life. My dad has told me this my whole life. Garbage in, garbage out. You lay with a dog long enough, you get its fleas. You're gonna end up doing what everybody else is doing because that's what you've been desensitized to, that's what you've become used to, and that's what it's become in the world that you live in, sometimes to survive.
I think the gang involvement that he was involved in when he was a teenager kind of upped the seriousness of his behavior beyond just, maybe destroying a few things or stealing. He had some assaultive crimes in his background. So I think it was beyond just a little bit of a troubled teen.
Hernandez strikes me as the type of person who got involved in this life of crime and then just really saw no exit If anything, he kept escalating his behavior. He got the positive reinforcement from the gangs and from crime and from doing things that made himself feel good regardless of how it impacted others. So it seems like that just took over his life and he acted upon it without any concern or regard for the consequences of his actions.
It wasn't long before Hernandez elevated his crimes to a new level and let the killer within out.
It's about power and control and domination. And Hernandez clearly wanted to dominate a woman.
Rodrigo Hernandez had been sentenced to death for the rape and murder of Susan Verstegen in 1994. In 2009, Hernandez would once again be implicated in a violent murder, this time in his hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan. A murder that had taken place almost 20 years earlier, on the 8th of September 1991. Detective Erica Fannin and Detective Sergeant Sally Walter worked on the case.
It was on a list of cases, our cold cases, that were unsolved. And so typically, we would open these cases and look at the physical evidence and read through the investigation and decide whether or not there was anything at that time that we could do to further investigate the case. And in this particular case, there had been no witnesses to this murder, but there was physical evidence that was recovered.
The murder in question was the assault and shooting of an elderly woman on the streets of Grand Rapids.
Her actual cause of death was a gunshot wound to her head. She actually suffered from 3 different gunshot wounds to her head, one of which was fatal.
She had major concussion and fractures to the front of her face, so she'd been beaten.
The victim was 77-year-old Grand Rapids local Muriel Stoka. In a chilling echo of Susan's murder, the small amount of physical evidence meant the case went unsolved.
There was a male DNA profile that was recovered, but it was an unknown male. And so when we opened up that case, we had no idea who that male was.
What happened between 1991 and 2009 was that the DNA analysis, the DNA process became more sensitive, and it became easier to, with a smaller amount of DNA, to be more specific and to be able to enter those samples into the national database.
Despite previous dealings with Hernandez, at the time of the murder, Michigan police had no reason to link him to this killing.
Muriel Stoka had a real troubled life. She came from a very good family, but it wasn't until 1950 when tragedy hit Muriel, when her boyfriend of 15 years died in a tragic tractor accident. Muriel spiraled downwards after the loss of her boyfriend and refused any treatment, medically, psychologically, and started to live on the streets. All her life belongings were in grocery bags, and the public got to know her as Mary the Bag Lady.
On September the 8th, 1991, Muriel's beaten and naked body was found in a parking garage by local residents.
It was stuffed inside this small, dark alcove, and a horrible place to die because nobody could see you from the roadway. And her belongings, her trash bags, were outside that little alcove. Her body was unclothed. They were able to find some of her belongings inside the bus shelter that was across the street, and one of her tennis shoes was still up there. The other tennis shoe was still on her foot.
Just like Susan's murder, there was a sexual element to Hernandez's crime. And again, like Susan's murder, there was nothing connecting Hernandez to the killing.
It appears that Muriel performed a sex act with Rodrigo, and at some point, he ejaculated in her mouth, and that is where the Grand Rapids Police Department were able to swab and get a DNA sample. Outside of that DNA sample, there are no other pieces of evidence that had any connection to Rodrigo Hernandez at that scene.
It's unlikely that Hernandez planned out his murder. It seems more likely that while he was engaged, particularly in the sex act, and aroused, he was acting on other urges. He almost got a rush out of it, and it was just something that was totally the cherry on top of the crime that he was committing, and he felt that that was the reason for committing such a violent act against such a vulnerable victim.
Muriel was older and frail, and at the time that Hernandez attacked her, he was a teenager. And this is a kind of a common thing in this type of crime, that the older the victim, when we start talking about much older people, the younger the perpetrator is likely to be. And the reason for that is that older women are less able to fight, are much easier to overpower.
When he killed Muriel, teenager Hernandez was still a part of the Latin Kings. The sexual assault and murder of an elderly woman would have lost him credibility within the gang.
I can't imagine that every gang member goes out executing 77-year-old women. The Latin Kings would have never accepted him having sex and executing a 77-year-old woman.
There's a lot of respect and street code associated with gangs. And for somebody to have picked on a vulnerable victim and committed an act like that, it's, in a gang member's mind, almost as egregious as preying intentionally on a child. There's just some things you just would not do.
At the time, an 18-year-old gang member didn't fit the police's suspect profile. This allowed Hernandez to hide in plain sight.
Back in 1991, the original investigation, they actually opened a grand jury investigation into that murder. So they really focused a lot on other people that were similar to her, when in reality, they were focusing on completely the wrong type of person. He was absolutely the complete opposite of the people that they were looking into back in 1991.
Hernandez had got away with his crime for 18 years, until in 2009, the very same DNA evidence that tied him to the murder of Susan Verstegen once again caught him out.
After the DNA evidence was resubmitted for analysis, and it was then brought up to the standards in 2009 to be entered into the national database. It was compared to all DNA samples in the national database, and that's when it matched to a DNA sample that had been provided by Rodrigo Hernandez when he was released from a Michigan prison in 2002.
With this fresh evidence, Michigan police were now desperate to question Hernandez about Muriel's murder. Erica Fannon traveled to Huntsville, Texas to meet with Hernandez, who was on death row for the murder of Susan Verstegen.
Our hope in interviewing him was that he would explain to us what happened in Grand Rapids in 1991. To try to convince him to talk to us, we brought a letter from our prosecuting attorney's office. And in that letter, it stated to Rodrigo that He would not be charged criminally with anything that he spoke to us about during that interview.
Despite this, Hernandez still refused to discuss the murder of Muriel.
All along the way, we see this pattern of very selfish behavior where Hernandez is constantly doing the things that benefit him, and he has very little regard or empathy for how his actions impact others.
He kept going back to, well, I have appeals left here in the state of Texas. I'm afraid anything I would say to you would then be used against me. He was actually a very pleasant person to speak with. He was very polite. I do remember specifically during the interview, he seemed embarrassed by both of these crimes.
A lot of people do things that they don't like or feel embarrassed about, whether it is binge watching TV or whether it's standing up in front of the refrigerator and eating something you shouldn't. We all have these types of things, but for most people, it's not committing crimes like sexual assault and murder. And so he could feel embarrassed about these things, but at the same time, feel the urge to do them and have the lack of ability to stop himself.
I just remember him saying that his grandmother raised him better than that, and that he was raised to respect women.
Well, somebody who has to say that they respect women probably doesn't. Most people would probably say, rape someone? I'm not capable of raping someone. Oh my God, this is awful. To bring the word respect into such an awful conversation means that respect is at the forefront of this for him. So maybe he feels he doesn't get enough respect from women, and that's what really annoys him.
The way he disposed of Susan's body, the same as he did with Muriel, of just leaving her on the ground in the stairwell, to me that speaks volumes of how you feel about women. Just disposing of them. And it's funny because his family, his sister, his girlfriends, never described him as being a violent person.
The fact that Hernandez presented himself as being a gentler, kinder man to certain women, but on the streets came off as very tough and violent, really spoke to the fact that he had all of this right underneath the surface, and that he did have a trigger hair temper, and things that may not always appear on the surface level is right underneath. So he was constantly just holding back or 1 second away from showing his true colors.
After hours of interviewing Hernandez, Erica was forced to leave empty-handed.
He was involved. We knew it, and we wanted his explanation.
So more than 3 years later, in 2012, with Hernandez edging ever closer to his execution date, Sally Walter went to Huntsville, Texas, to face him.
He had sandals on and pretty much of a shaved head, I would say, and appeared to be well-fed, had no medical issues or anything that drew my attention. Rodrigo was very polite, very courteous, willing to talk to us for a period of time, but he still refused to talk to us about Muriel Stoka. The problem was he thought he had one more chance with the governor, and he didn't want to talk. So I realized at that point that if we were ever going to get the truth out of him, somebody needed to be there hours before that execution happened.
The only way to get the confession they needed was to call in the Texas Rangers.
I had an hour to extract whatever information he was willing to give.
On the 26th of January 2012, Rodrigo Hernandez was to be executed by the state of Texas for committing the 1994 murder of Susan Verstegen. Before it was too late, police were desperate to talk to him about his part in the 1991 homicide of Muriel Stoka.
We were there just for the truth, and that his time was limited in order to tell it to somebody.
Time was now running out for detectives to confirm Hernandez was Muriel's killer. Their last opportunity to get the confession was Texas Ranger Steve Jeter.
This was a last-ditch effort of the investigators that were working some unsolved murders to bring some closure to some families. You know, originally went in to visit with him around noontime. He wasn't ready to talk. I went back to visit with him at 5 o'clock, so I knew I only had an hour to visit with him before the execution process would start, because there wasn't going to be a postponement.
What time is it?
We got time. It's 5:26. This thing doesn't kick off till 6.
The governor already came with this decision.
What's that?
The governor?
Yes, it's a go. It's going to be a go.
Okay.
The governor hasn't given a stay in 12 years of being a governor.
With less than an hour before his execution and all his options exhausted, Hernandez finally opened up about both murders.
As he sat in his chair behind the bars, I sat a chair in front of him, and I leaned forward to it like this, and we visited and got the information that we needed.
So I just worked.
Mm-hmm.
And something bad happened.
Right.
I'm sure you did. But she got a fire hand.
Right.
And I panicked.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what to do, man.
How did she die in your hands?
I was panicked. This was man.
Did you hit her in the head? Did you strangle her? Or how did she die?
From my strangulation.
From strangulation? What'd you have around her neck?
Nothing.
Your hands? Why were you doing that? Was it just a fetish that you do, or did she make you mad, or what?
Oh, man, I don't know what to do, man.
Right. Okay. Well, tell me about Michigan. Tell me what happened up in Michigan.
He talked like you and I talked over supper. It wasn't a big deal to him. This was just another day at the office for him. His voice didn't go up, his voice didn't go down. We maintained eye contact. There was no emotion, but we just carried on a conversation like two guys talking at a bar.
How long from the time that you shot her, or how long from the time of having oral sex, from the time that you shot her?
Right, it was happening, right? I would have that gun, and it just went off, man.
So you had the gun in your hand were you forcing her to hit?
If Muriel went willingly down into that alcove to provide a sex act for him, why would she leave her tennis shoe in that bus stop? To me, that weapon that Rodrigo Hernandez had was used to take Muriel down into that alcove and force her to perform sex on him. I don't think it was a voluntary option on Mary's part whatsoever.
$20, man, but that gun was not a safety, man. It wasn't like, you know what I'm saying? It was had my pocket and it was falling down, like my pants.
Okay.
And I went to grab it, and I grabbed it, hammer, man. And when I grabbed like this, boom, it went off.
And what did you think after that happened? Did it scare you? Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that the first time you'd ever killed? What did it feel like?
No, man, I didn't know what to do, man.
Right.
I didn't know what to do, man. And I've been living with them.
He still wasn't being truthful. I'd believe that story if Muriel Stoka had not been beaten and if she hadn't been shot 3 times in the head.
Some people are particularly adept at keeping very sizable and bad secrets to themselves. But this is something that's a vulnerability, and police will often try to exploit to get a confession out of a killer because they know that it could be very difficult to hold on to. So he was very good at this, but he didn't quite keep it all a secret. He was able to confess in a way to the crimes. He just denied some of the responsibility and blamed it on either the victims or accidental circumstances as a way of minimizing his involvement, regardless of how involved he truly was in the offense.
You sure can. Just go ahead.
I want to tell her dad loves her, and don't worry about me, and keep your head up, and I love you.
Okay. This concludes the interview. It is January 26, 2012, a Thursday at 5:32 p.m.
Hernandez's time was finally up.
My last memory of Rodrigo is him in the death chamber, strapped to the bed, with his arms stretched out and with needles inserted in both of his arms, looking over to the window, saying bye to his family, and basically told the warden he was ready. He went to sleep, he snored a little bit, and didn't make another sound.
At 6:09 p.m. on the 26th of January 2012, Rodrigo Hernandez was put to death by lethal injection. With his death came closure for the families of his victims. Susan's son Charles spoke after the execution.
Nearly 18 years ago, Susan Verstegen, a woman in the prime of her life, was killed at the hands of a stranger. A 15-year-old boy suddenly lost his mom, a mother and father lost their daughter, and a family lost a beloved sister. Today, the man who took her life paid the ultimate price for his actions with his own life, and now I pray for his soul. Although I support the death penalty, there is no joy in this for me, nor should there be for anyone listening. I'm now 33 years old with a wonderful wife and 2 young children. Today's execution doesn't change the fact that my kids will never hear the sweet laugh or feel the tender embrace of their grandmother.
While the families of his victims were able to find some kind of peace, to this day, no one will ever truly know the inner workings of Hernandez's mind and why he unleashed the killer within.
He had no regard to human life. He used them as both objects, as sexual objects. He took what he wanted, ultimately took their lives, and just left them like a bag of trash. These were somebody's loved ones. It didn't occur to him that somebody would miss them. They weren't going to be there for Christmas.
The use of violence and aggression became normalized for him. There was just no sense of moral reasoning, no moral thinking that took place to really empathize with his victims.
When I received a phone call from Texas Ranger Steve Jeter, who told me Rodrigo Hernandez was just executed, I felt some justice for Muriel and obviously for Susan. But I drove then to Muriel's family's home and told them what had occurred. And although they had felt closure years ago, knowing she was at peace and not walking the streets, they were really appreciative to know that they had received justice, although delayed, but somebody remembered the bag lady.